Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray. You would have seen in the last one that I did where I talked about myself that I said that some of the things I like to delve into are topics which are obscure, or people tend not to explore them for whatever reason, or they reproduce generalized comments about certain things. And completely uncharted for me, the question today is going to be one of those serendipitously that covers something that I've done exactly that with, and that is fire signaling, which we'll get to in a minute. Of course, welcome, Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray. You can ask us a question. You can send us an email, AWA at ancientwarfare.com, or indeed AWA at caravansaraipublishers.com. You can comment on a video, comment on a podcast. You can send us a postcard. The address is P.O. Box 222, Belfield, Belfield, NSW 2191, Australia. You can stop me in the street. That hasn't happened yet. I'm looking forward to the day I get stopped in the street. That would be very cool. Yes, you can, of course, back us on Patreon, patreon.com/Ancient Warfare Podcast. You can back us at one of three levels. At the top level, which is Centurion, you can get a print copy of the magazine. At the Optio level, you can get a digital copy of the magazine. And at Legionary, you can just follow us on the podcast and support us, which would be lovely. Now, today's question is from someone named GC. Oh, very nice. And they say, recently reread Thucydides. Can I ask a question? Fire signals of an attack were also raised towards Thebes, but the Plataeans in the town at once displayed a number of others prepared beforehand for this very purpose, in order to render the enemy's signals unintelligible. Ancient signal jamming. Very cool. I would have imagined that a fire signal was quite simple, fire or no fire. This implies much greater sophistication. What is known about this? Thanks. Right, here we go. So at the same time, remarkably little, and we have two sources especially which have quite a lot of detail. And the earliest recorded fire signals are Aeschylus talking about fire signals during the Homeric Wars, during the mythological period. But we also have fire signals being mentioned for the Greco-Persian Wars. And so that sort of seems to be a long distance one. If you want any kind of image that evokes the fire signals of the ancient world, go and watch the Beacons Are Lit, the Beacons of Minas Tirith section of the Lord of the Rings movies. I got very geeky at that point in time. And we then get sort of the evolution, such as this signal jamming one. Now, to jam signals implies signals are known, that the signal itself is known, that there's a way to jam the signal, and that there's, that implies a sophistication, which implies a sort of a longevity to that point, that what the fire signals are, that that you can jam them by lighting different fires, which is about the interdivisibility of the fire signals, as in how far away they can be seen and differentiated. Now, I say that because we have a source in Polybius who talks about fire signals and flag signals in the 3rd century BC. We then have another source, Julius Africanus, who wrote a thing called the Kestoi in the mid-3rd century AD, and he talks about fire signaling. Those are our two major sources. More on that anon. So what Polybius does, so you've got the Greek alphabet of 24 letters, and the Latin alphabet of 24 letters. And what Polybius's system does is it breaks it down into 5 groups of 5 letters. So one with one gap. What that means is you have a left and a right. And for instance, on the left group, you would raise flag 3. That's your 3rd group of letters. And on your right set of flags, you would raise the 3rd flag. That would be the 3rd letter in the 3rd group, which is a way of sending pseudo Morse code and relatively quick messaging. And of course, that's great for daytime, but of course, in nighttime, it would be fires. Now, the interesting thing, of course, about how far apart would those fires need to be, and how far away would they need to be seen in order that you can differentiate which of the fires are being lit. And that seems to be a bit of an issue, because you don't necessarily know where 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are to know which one's which. But that's a system that Polybius talks about. Now, the interesting thing with some of these messages is that they are complex messages. They are 100 of the enemy have arrived, not just signal. So there seems to be some kind of alphabetic encoding system that's being used, and that's what Polybius describes. Similarly, the 3rd century AD system described by Sextus Julius Africanus in the Kestoi is 3 groups of 8 rather than 5 groups of 5. So he talks about the alphabet being divided into 3 groups of 8 letters, and you have 3 fires and 3 fires only. So not 2 groups of 3 fires, 3 fires only. So the first fire being lit tells you which group. So for instance, if you light 1-1, that's the letter A or alpha. That's fascinating in the sense that when you look at certain coins of the 4th century AD, so if you look at the coins of Licinius and Constantius and Constantine, they have what's called a camp gate, and I've written about that in the magazine and elsewhere, that these 3 fires seem to be, they look like Weber barbecue kettles, and often they're called turrets, but they don't look like turrets. They look like fire signals. And so I've argued that those perhaps are commemorating a signaling system. And interestingly, the 10-meter square top of a turret, whether it be on Hadrian's Wall or elsewhere on the Roman frontiers, the work by David Williams has said that those would be visible and differentiatable between 1 to 3 fires by distances of kilometers. Now, interestingly, on Hadrian's Wall, these things are 500 meters apart, so you can definitely signal from one to the other. But interestingly, you wouldn't necessarily signal across the wall. You might signal back from the wall. So it would need to get back to Vindolanda, for instance, or across the wall to one of the forts. So that's fascinating in itself. So if you think about and I'm not saying that these people are fast Morse coders, but they're probably able to communicate relatively complex messages relatively quickly. Again, one of the interesting things about these fire signaling systems is those ones that are described by Polybius and Sextus Julius Africanus have no further encoding. So it's 1-1 means A, 1-2 means B, 1-3 means C. So you would expect, for instance, there to be further encoding, the least number of, again, putting on your Morse code cap, the least number of flashes for the most common letters, in which case you're going to have E as 1-1 rather than A. I think is 1-2 for the frequency. There was an article about the Roman Scrabble and the frequency of letters, and that's really fascinating because if you reorganize the Roman alphabet, obviously, letters like X, Y, Z, which are used in Latin alphabet for Greek words, are going to be right down the ends of they're going to be, 1-8, 2-8, and 3-8, for instance. And so if that's the case, you can quickly and more quickly message about these sorts of things. And obviously Roman numerals are fantastically useful. Rather than have to do 800, you could just do, how does that even work, Mary? Come on, LCCC, and that will tell you 800. So in those senses, the signaling could be quite complex. Now, when you start to compare it to later signaling systems, interestingly, some of that complexity disappears. So, for instance, for the Armada from the time of Henry VIII onwards, and I know I'm leaping forward thousands of years, well, 1,000 and a bit, 1,200 years, there is a signaling system on the south coast of England, which was a sort of a graded system, 1, 2, 3. So 1 was, be ready, 2 was, muster now, and 3 was disaster, invasions happening. So that would be 3 fires close together. And again, the idea of they needed to be sort of further apart than just next to one another. Whereas the basic version is, if you see this fire lit, this is the message it's sending, which is, of course, the Minas Tirith. When the beacons are lit, you need to come and help us. So what it seems to be saying in the ancient world, though, is that the signals such as that Plataea, when there's jamming going on. So if you think about what we were just saying, you need 3 fires. If the enemy are lighting another fire relatively close on their wall, for instance, the person viewing the number of fires is going to get confused as to exactly which one's what and which one's flashing and what does it mean. So that's complex and interesting in itself. So I find the whole world of fire signaling fascinating. I wrote recently about the Battle of Adrianople. There's fires being lit during the Battle of Adrianople, normally regarded as, even Ammianus says these are for creating smoke to get in the eyes and the throats of the Romans. But that would get in the eyes and the throats of the Goths too. Is it a signal? And I think it's a signal. And there are other evidences of signaling, but they don't tell us in the sources whether it's fire signaling or trumpet signaling or other kinds of signaling. So there's suggesting bits of fire signaling throughout Roman history, and I find that fascinating. So I hope that answers and made some sort of sense. Join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.